Greetings. Welcome to ITR Live. I'm your host, Chris Hagenow, and we are here in the Hendrickson Library at the Center for the Preservation of Western Civilization. Excited to have Sarah Curry join us today on the episode. Good morning, Sarah. How are you? I did it again. I did this last time. I accidentally pressed stop on the record, and now it just throws everything off. So anyway, we'll soldier on and get through it. So anyway, happy to have you here. Glad you're here in the studio. And you've got plenty to share today. So first things first, I'm trying to get better at the kind of administrative stuff on the front end, but remind everyone, like who we are and what we do. We're Project of Iowans for Tax Relief. You can find this if you're listening to us on audio. We're across all your major audio platforms, but you can catch us there. But we're also on YouTube and Rumble, so you can catch the video if you actually want to watch us do that. Which comes to the question that we also have to answer here. If you're joining us on YouTube, Sarah is adamant that we need to work on the studio furniture, and she does not like the host desk here. Because you keep hitting your knees on it. It's like, right? Is that right? You can't get up under it.
I can't scoot my chair underneath it. I feel I just feel awkward.
It's awkward. Look, we're still transitioning into the studio. This isn't what I want either. Trying to find new stuff, but we're a humble nonprofit with a limited budget, and we've got to make do with what we have.
So, to our listeners out there, you will get a shout out on the podcast if you can recommend a good podcast table for us to use.
John found one, but it was spendy. It was really cool. It was kind of like it's like the shape of a guitar pick or something. It was like a triangle, and it had all the cool like stands on it and everything. Yeah, we can't afford that. It was really cool though. So anyway, hopefully you can make do with the table and the desk that we have, but because we're going to need you to drop some truth on us today. So one of the things we're trying to do here is sort of feature the content that we have, and you've just released a new article. It's up on the ITR Foundation website right now, and it's sort of the next phase in looking at what's working and not working right now, the impacts of previous property tax reforms, and maybe I'm overselling this, but hopefully it's instructive to our policymakers as they look to the next round of reforms. Is that enough?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay. So
you got to learn from history so you don't repeat the same mistakes over and over again.
Right. I choose usually not to learn, is just have you tell me what I need to know, and hopefully I can reflect it in real time. That all having been said, tell us a little bit about some of the research that you've done. And it's looking at growth in tax rates, what specifically cities, have been through it, because we hear a lot from cities about where they're at. Let's hear it from you.
Well, I want to take one step back and look at the state as a whole. So there's multiple local governments that collect property taxes. Schools, cities, and counties are the largest of those. And then we have community colleges, townships, assessors, and the smaller collectors. So overall, Iowa hit a big milestone this year. So for 2025, total property tax collections across the state hit $7 billion.
That's a lot of money.
That is a whole lot of money. Just in 1 year, there was a 6.8% increase from last year to this year in total property taxes, and that's what pushed us over that. So our current property tax system kind of goes back to 1975-ish. So for the last 50-ish years, property taxes have increased like 620+%.
Okay.
Inflation over that same time has only been 420%. So using inflation as an argument for needing more taxes just doesn't hold, because that's not actually what happened. The other thing that I thought was interesting, so schools make up around 40% of our property tax, cities 30%, and counties 22%. For those of you that are thinking, oh, well, it went up 1 year, so it'll go down, right? I don't have much hope for you.
No.
So in that 50-year time span, property taxes only decreased twice. Once in 1988 and the other time in 1997. And they only decreased by about 1%.
It's interesting, just the scope of how much money goes into that system. You said the $7 billion went into that, and that was all tax types, or
no, just property tax.
I'm sorry,
just property tax.
All taxing entities.
Mm-hmm, right.
But the whole state budget is about $9 billion.
Yeah.
So
isn't that crazy?
You're seeing that your local governments is costing you roughly the same as your state government costs you. And that just, to me, doesn't make sense. And I'm going to let you keep going. I still fundamentally believe that we have too much government in Iowa. Too many layers, too many elected officials. Popularly, if you talk to people, they'll ask, well, why do we have 99 counties? I mean, I might suggest, why do we have almost 1,000 cities? Why do they all need their own specific administration of government? But that's probably another conversation for another day. We just have a lot of government, a lot of layers of it, and that all costs a lot of money.
It does, and I think it's important to look at that whole picture. So it's not, Dallas County grew because there's more growth and this and that. No, it's across the state.
Yeah.
It's a lot of money. So then I want to get into the restrictions, right? So we hear about property tax reform and everybody starts screaming, we're going to cut police and fire and grandma's not going to have an ambulance. Well, that's not really holding water either when we look at the data. So
let's set the stage for when we're talking about the restriction. This is in the and maybe you were getting to this, and if you were, I apologize. In the 2023 property tax bill, there was a new mechanism put in place in an attempt to restrict expenditure growth based on how quickly your county was growing. So can you kind of set the stage a little bit for what that is, right?
Yeah, so the whole concept was, if you're in a rural county with no growth and your property values are kind of holding stagnant, it's not fair to make you cut because you don't have any growth. This is the theory, right?
Right.
And then if you're in a fast-growing community and your property values are growing really fast, you probably have more discretionary income coming in, and so you have more ability to cut. So that's why they went with this type of restriction.
Right.
So what it was, there were different thresholds, and it was 3%. If you were below 3%, you were left alone.
Your taxable valuation across the jurisdiction, if it grew by more than 3%, right? Or is that, no,
if it
that's
grew
right.
by less than 3%. So your assessments, if all the assessments in your area, they grew by less than 3%, you were left alone, nobody touched you, business is as normal. If you were between 3 to 6%, you only had to cut new revenue, right? So we're not saying so any additional revenue that would come in, you have to cut that by 2%. And then if you grew more than 6%, you had to cut it by 3%.
Right.
And so those were our thresholds.
So the net of that is there were some restrictions that we believed were being put in place to restrict growth.
Right.
Okay.
Right. So there were 75 counties that had a restriction placed on them.
Because they were growing.
But I want to tell you, if they had that 2% restriction, those counties grew their property taxes still by 5.8% year over year. And if they had the 3% restriction, they grew their property taxes 8.8% year over year. So when I hear counties say, we can't handle this restriction, I'm sorry, I didn't get an 8% raise last year. And I know that a lot of my friends didn't either. Yet the counties in that category spent 8% more in property taxes this year than they did last year. So they're not starving.
No, I think they're going to.
Now, when we look at cities, it was the same restriction for cities. And so now there's 940 cities. I want everyone to understand that. It goes from a city of 10 people to the city of Des Moines.
We have an incorporated city with 10 people?
We do. Mm-hmm.
I didn't know that. Okay.
Leroy. Yeah.
Where's Leroy?
I'm not sure, but when I talked to their county auditor, they said that no one will run for city council because there's not enough people. So eventually it'll go away. But anyway, so we do have cities of very small
I have to, Sarah. I'm sorry. If we have anyone that listens to the podcast from Leroy or Leroy or whatever it is, please make yourself known. We would love to talk to you. I personally would love to talk to you. I'm so excited to find somebody from Leroy. I may actually get in the car and drive out and visit you guys. There we go.
It wouldn't take long to knock those doors.
Right, that's right. Okay, anyway, I'm just fascinated by that. Anyway, go ahead.
No, you're fine. So when we look at this, I just want everyone to understand the cities, 467 cities had that maximum limitation, okay? But don't feel bad for them because they increased property taxes on average by 13.8%.
So these are the growing cities that are they had their taxable value or their assessed values grow by more than 6%, grew their budgets by how much?
13.8%. And in dollar terms, that's an additional $65 million.
Yeah.
Okay. Cities as a whole, so looking at all cities, they increased their property tax collections year over year. So I'm looking at only 1 year by $115 million.
Yeah.
That's with restrictions.
Right.
So think, if there was no restrictions on that, it would have been higher.
That's, yeah, troubling to say the least. Okay. So you had, when we were talking in the pre-production here, the rate at which Iowans understand that their property tax burden is out of control. And I think most of them understand that their burden is growing faster than their ability to pay. And you even said this earlier, but almost that sense, that factor is almost accelerating. Is that something?
It is, yeah. So when I looked at the historical trend of how fast property tax collections are increasing, so just to give you a snapshot, years ago, it took us 14 years to go from $1 billion to $2 billion. Okay. I want to remind people that was a high inflationary period, in the 70s. So kind of more so than it is today. Mm-hmm. Now it's only taking 3 to 4 years to jump an additional $1 billion.
Yeah.
And so it's accelerating faster and in larger increments year over year. And so I do believe, even in the 70s and 80s, when we had those high inflationary time periods, double-digit interest rates, we had the farm crisis, property taxes still grew, local government still provided services.
Still got theirs. Yeah.
They still provided services and they still got their property tax, but at least I feel like it was manageable, and they did increase at maybe a 2% rate year over year. It was much slower. Now we're seeing 6-7% jumps year after year. That is unsustainable for anybody. And I tell you what, if the state budget was growing 6 or 7% year over year, the state taxpayers, income and sales tax, that it couldn't sustain that. That's just not sustainable on any measure.
Right.
And so when local governments say we can't make it, now I'm not saying there's not the random city or the random county that is in good faith and they're trying to do the right thing. Like the one size fits all policy, it sucks, but that's just where we're at.
But
there's more bad actors than good.
There's a one size problem, which is that Iowans are paying too much in property tax. So I'm not going to apologize for pursuing sweeping restrictions because, and this is for this reason, Sarah, is that they're not in aggregate policing themselves. They're time and again, the legislature and the people of Iowa are saying you're taking too much of my money, and they don't respond. It's tone deaf. It feels to many of the people that we talk to that they're simply not listening.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I mean, we hear stories all the time that say, oh, well, we're trying to do this right, and we're trying to do this right. And we had one community reach out to us recently. Oh, well, we tried and we tried and we tried. And then we're like, we went to ITR Local, and we pulled it up. We're like, well, the red line doesn't lie, buddy. Yeah. Your county increased property taxes almost 90% in 10 years.
Yeah.
How is that? And they're like, oh, it was that much? Then they're starting to realize, oh, my decisions have consequences. That's a lot of money.
Every once in a while, and I don't study numbers and budgets like you do. I mean, that's your thing. But every once in a while, you'll hear a comment from some, official from a city or a county, and you're like, oh, give me a break. It's just over the top. And so I'll go and pull their most recent budget that I can find it. Every single time, I can find something in about 5 minutes that they could cut. Mm-hmm. They might not want to cut it, but they could cut it and still deliver core services to their people.
Yes, and and I've talked to other county board members, and they have told me, they're like, it's not easy to cut. It's not. They said, but it's our job, and we have to do this. And so there are people out there trying, but unfortunately, the system is just set up to just keep.
Okay, I'm going to go on a rant for a minute.
Good. I'm glad I was there.
It's difficult to cut, but how about we take a look at the state legislature, because they're able to do it for at least. I mean, look, at least since 2011, when Republicans took control of the Iowa House and Governor Branstad came back, but definitely since the legislative trifecta, which started in 2017, they have limited spending. They have gone through that budget, and I know I watched that process. I was a part of it. You go through that line item and you ask the hard question every year. We're going to separate wants versus needs, and the legislature still spends money on things that they could cut. Yeah, it gets more and more difficult as the years go by, but you separate once, and to this issue that it's difficult to cut, yes, it is. Because every time there is a line item in a budget, there is a constituency behind it. Every time there's a line, and we can bang on the lobbyists that are up there with their hands out, but ultimately there are people behind that, and it's hard to tell them no. Now, some of us sort of enjoyed it from time to time, but that's neither here nor there. But yes, it is. You signed up for this. You signed up to be a steward of taxpayers' money, and you are going to have to tell them, no, we can't do this right now. And it should be hard. And I completely discount. I reject the idea that we can't cut spending because it's hard. You may have to tell your city administrator, no, we can't do that. And we've got some great people out there, and we're finding more of them all the time. Mm-hmm. These local officials that are in the mix trying to do it, but it's tough. It is, and the part where it is tough is because it's not just those constituents behind it, but sometimes it's your own staff.
Yeah,
that's pushing you on it. So maybe one last thing as I kind of wrap up the rant. If you are one of those people that are out there trying to do it the right way, please get in touch with us, because I know, Sarah, you especially really enjoy visiting with those folks, trying to be a resource if you can, help you out, and if nothing else, just help you feel like you're not out there alone trying to do this. So there. Go ahead.
And I guess that's my point. Like, we paint the doom and gloom picture because, unfortunately, folks, like, it's not great. Like, it's not getting better. But there are good actors. There are people trying. They're reaching out to us. We are working together. And ITR, we're not making up crazy ideas.
No. Like,
we get these ideas because we get feedback from the people in communities across Iowa that are trying to make a difference and trying to make it better. But, if you're on a board of supervisors and you're only 1 out of 3, you can't do it alone. Yep. And so... Yeah.
And we and to be fair, yes, there's good individual actors. There's actually cities that are doing a great job. There are counties that are doing a great job. And we try to highlight those where we can. So we do want to be fair, but there is no question that in aggregate, there's a real problem. And the spending is out of control. And we talk about this in the office regularly. It's why we keep coming back over and over to it's not the problem of the assessment. It's not the problem of how the formula is written. The problem is the underlying local government spends too much money. That's the problem.
It is. It's 100% the problem. And, I listen to the Ramsey podcast.
Yeah.
All the time. He's like, stop spending money. Stop spending money if you don't have it. Because people like to, take out loans and debt. Yeah. And local government's the same way. They're not taking out debt. Well, sometimes they are. But they're just taxing people. Yeah. Oh, we want a new shiny swimming pool. Let's tax. Oh, we want a new art center. Let's tax. And it's like, no, like beans and rice and beans. Like, let's just take care of what we have to take care of.
Is there a way that we could get Dave Ramsey to come in and basically run local governments? Like,
I have actually thought about reaching out to his group and saying, I admire the work that he's doing. Mm-hmm. And has he ever thought about like doing that for government or looking at government?
That'd be awesome.
Or he actually had a discussion, was it with Donald Trump before the election?
Yeah.
And I thought it was really well done because he didn't really get political. He really stuck to his principles. I just love him. Yeah, and he's unapologetically just honest, and I love it.
You think local governments are squirming because Iowans for Tax Relief is talking about a 2% spending cap? Wait till they squirm when Dave Ramsey shows up. Yeah. Because that 2%, they're going to be lining up to take that deal.
Yeah.
Anyway,
so anyway, it's just I love looking at the data. It's really interesting. I'm really excited about the legislature coming up because everyone's talking about property tax reform and they're going to do something. And just so everybody out there understands, yes, local control. Locals have control over their spending decisions, but the state is the one that gives them the authority to tax and the authority to spend. And so if there's going to be a restriction, the state is the one that has to impose that restriction. And so I'm excited to see what the legislature comes out with.
I can't go back to this one often enough. I'm going to say two things. One is my favorite line. Local control. Every time it comes up, and I'm going to keep repeating it over and over, the only time these folks talk about local control is when they want to tax us more or take away more of our freedom. I have yet once to hear about local control offered by these people when they are trying to stick up for the individual taxpayer or the individual citizen's freedom. Just that's critical. But along the way, this idea of local control is just blindly offered up every time they don't like something the legislature proposed. Oh, it's local control. Let us do whatever we want. Well, guess what? Whatever you want to do has led to enormous property tax increases. Whatever you want to do is all this nonsense and building projects that maybe you saddle your taxpayers with generational debt to satisfy a handful of people that want something, or the elected officials' innate desire to build some vertical spending project so they can feel good about themselves. That's what local control is always. So anytime you hear that, I mean, if you're polite, don't chuckle at them. But where I want to get with this is the state legislature is still in charge. And the state legislature still gets to decide the method of taxation in this state. They still get to decide levels of taxation and how much they can do and where they can spend it on. And it is absolutely the prerogative of the legislature to adjust that and adapt that anytime they see fit, especially so when they have abdicated their responsibilities to the taxpayers. And they have been out on the campaign trail in this last election, heard over and over and over, do something about my property taxes. If they were to not step in and do something on property taxes, they would be neglecting the obligation that they have to the voters that sent them there. That's what I have to say about local control today.
Well, I'm going to piggyback off of that.
Okay, good.
For listeners who don't remember the mental health levy? The property tax for mental health?
Another one we can't talk about enough.
So mental health used to be paid for by the counties, property tax. So the state came out and said, you know what, we're going to take that away. We're going to give property taxpayers a savings, and we're going to take that burden on at the state level.
Right.
And so many counties, I think the term I've heard, the dirty 30.
Yeah.
They decided to keep that levy, and they're like, well, people are used to paying it, so why are we going to give them savings? Let's just spend it on something else.
Yep.
And that's the local control you're talking about.
Yeah.
So the legislature, in good faith, said, we're going to take this burden off the counties, thinking, okay, these counties are obviously going to pass the savings on to their communities. And a number of counties chose not to do that. And that's the problem, right?
I will tell you that episode, and I like to take credit. I mean, we kind of revealed it. We wrote a really an article that got shared around a lot. That was a real eye-opener for the legislature, and that has really impacted the debate going forward. We've talked that we don't believe that there should be any more backfill payments or shifting of burdens inside that, because then you're just changing who pays. But it was going back to that mental health funding piece that I think really caused legislators to stop and think that's not the right way to do this. We could buy down this formula, we could give them this money, but in the end, coming full circle, none of those kinds of things stop the problem, which is local government spending.
No, and that's why I did the 50-year look back, because we've had property tax reforms. Rollback was instituted in the 70s, the school finance formula in the 70s. We did open enrollment for schools in the 80s, thinking that might help something. They did local option sales tax in the 90s. And then we've done all of these property tax reforms. And then there was the big commercial property tax thing in 2013. None of it's done anything. It hasn't actually even slowed the growth. It's just continuing on this upward trajectory. So something fundamentally has to change. The Band-Aid approach, the tiny little, fixes around the corners and technical corrections and formulas, just you have to blow it up. And we have to fix it. Yep.
I agree completely. And so I think that's a reminder. I mean, look, this is the last chance you're going to have to talk to the folks here on the podcast before the legislative session starts, unless you're planning on, I don't know, cutting an episode tomorrow by yourself or something. But anyway, I mean, I kind of want to maybe wrap this whole thing up by saying, a little look at what are these legislators, the ones that are going to decide these things, what are they going to be looking at going in? And right now, they've talked about it. I want to spend a little time on that maybe next week, but they're still right now talking to folks in their communities. They're talking to stakeholders around the state. And I know that the property tax conversation continues to be very hot. You mentioned that at the front end, but I mean, I'm guessing the one thing from your standpoint, is you'd like them reading this kind of information and understanding how bad the problem is, right? I mean,
oh yeah, because the restrictions that were in place last year, remember, they loosened them.
Yeah.
So they're going to be able to spend more. So again, it's well intended.
Yeah.
I understand the philosophy and the mission behind it. It was well intended. But as Milton Friedman has so famously said, that I like to say, don't judge a policy by its intentions, but its outcomes.
Right.
And that's where I shift from economics to finance.
Yeah.
Let's not look at the theory. Let's look at what actually happened and when the rubber meets the road and taxes are still going up faster than people can pay.
I agree. And I mean, there are pieces of the 2023 bill that did start us in the right direction.
Oh, 100%.
And so
100%.
Because we haven't stemmed the tide, it's not an indictment of that bill. It is much more an indictment of the folks that just keep spending through. They completely tap out one sum of money and they go get the credit cards. They just keep spending. And that is the problem we're trying to point out, in that, okay, we've said all along, and the legislature said when they did the bill in 2023 that this was a first step. And we're saying that the next step is going to need to be real, and it's going to make a lot of folks uncomfortable. And we've heard a lot of talk about everyone's at the table, and we're going to have a lot of conversations, and I'm kind of tired of the whole promise to have conversations. I, as a property taxpayer, want to hear a commitment to stopping the problem. And that's what needs to happen with this second step. Have your conversations, fine, but I want to hear it just as much about how many conversations with the League of Cities and the Iowa Association of Counties. I don't want to hear about that. That's your inside the building stuff, and you can make those promises and have those conversations. I, as a taxpayer, want to hear your commitment to fixing the problem.
Right, because at the end of the day, I do work here, and I am a finance nerd, but my most important job is being wife and mom to my 3 kids, and every dollar my government takes from me is one less dollar I have to spend on my family. And I don't mind spending money if it means my roads get plowed or I get better, police response at my home if something were to happen. But that's not what's going on. And I know I am not alone in that thought process. And so we really need to reprioritize where we're spending money. Iowans are not unreasonable people.
Nope.
We understand that our core government services cost money, but we're not receiving those core services. And then they're throwing money at unnecessary shiny objects. And that just pisses me off.
It's a value proposition no matter what it is. And Iowans will pay more for a personal private service if they get better service. I'll add a new streaming service if they got content I want to watch. It's a value proposition. If you're going to deliver, a core service that everyone needs, then it's going to cost money. And some of them cost more year over year. We get that. But it still has to stem from, like you said, that individual family's ability to pay. And that's what gets lost in all of this. And sometimes it's things as small as they build new welcome signs. I know my community loves to build new, welcome to Urbandale. Okay, fine. They're not, but those flashy things, they're just irritating to a lot of people because I don't get any value out of that.
Right.
And so every service, big and small, up and down that ladder, you're right. It's value. And are these benefiting everyone, and do they need to take place?
Yeah, 100%.
So anyway,
But yeah, so the legislature is going to do something. I don't know what they're going to do. There's a lot of ideas floating around out there. I am hopeful that we're going to have something really meaningful and really impactful happen. And I'm also anticipating a multi-step approach.
Yeah.
Like, this is not going to end this year.
Yep.
We're going to fight this into the future. But I will tell all the listeners out there, property tax is an issue nationwide.
Yes.
Like with the pandemic and inflation, it has happened nationwide, and there's a lot of states out there that are throwing around ideas for property tax reform. And I just want to tell people, you're so lucky that ITR is here. And I'm not just saying that because I work here.
Yeah.
There's a lot of bad ideas going on out there. Like Texas has some bad ideas. Florida, they're proposing some really bad ideas to curb their property tax that are going to hurt their state long term. Yeah. And at least in Iowa, yes, we have a problem, but the solutions that we are talking about are going to help future Iowans so that my kids will have a better life and a better community to live in. So I just want to let people know we're in a good place.
Yep. I think that's a great point. And maybe that's how I'll close this here, is that we're gonna stay in the mix, and we're gonna keep trying to highlight the issue because we're confident that this is among the things that Iowans expect out of this legislature more than anything else. And the solutions, we don't expect that we fix property taxes this year. It's a problem that has been 100 years in the making or more, as your work on the history of it has shown. And it's going to take many years to dig out of the hole. And so, but we do think that this next step in the process is going to need to be bold, and it's going to need to make some people pretty uncomfortable. And so we're here to encourage that, to help reflect people's voices on that. And we appreciate everyone that's been a part of elevating the issue and making their voices heard. So, Sarah, thanks for being here. I know you've got a lot today on behalf of the taxpayers of the state of Iowa, so you've got places to go and people to meet with.
I'm driving around the state talking to people, sharing the good news.
So that's great. So we should probably land the airplane and let you get on with it. So anyway, with that all having been said, thanks for joining us. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Don't forget to tell your friends. And with that, we will see you next time on ITR Live.